Some nights, Elena Morelli still set the table for two, forgetting for just a moment that no one was coming home. At 52, the quiet literature teacher had learned to find comfort in solitude, filling her Florence apartment with books instead of laughter. Then came the parent-teacher conference that changed everything. Bianchi walked into her classroom like any other concerned father. Distinguished and well-dressed, he spoke about his daughter's progress with genuine care. What he didn't mention was his real job as head of the city's most powerful crime family. His proposal was simple: marry him to help clean up his family's reputation. In return, he'd give her the family she'd always wanted. It was supposed to be just business. But sometimes the heart has other plans. Can two lonely people find real love in a world built on secrets? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Accademia Santa Chiara, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Elena Morelli adjusted her reading glasses and smoothed her navy wool dress as she prepared for another day of teaching literature to Florence's most privileged daughters. At 52, she had perfected the art of appearing composed while carrying the weight of decades of solitude. Her classroom overlooked the school's courtyard garden, where ancient olive trees stood sentinel among carefully tended roses. The walls were lined with her personal collection of books, leather-bound volumes of Dante, Petrarch, and Leopardi that she had accumulated over 24 years of teaching. Among them sat her most treasured possession, a well-worn collection of romantic poetry annotated in two different handwritings. Her late husband Antonio's careful script filled the margins alongside her own flowing notes, creating a dialogue across time that never ceased to bring both comfort and pain. Elena had been 28 when Antonio died in a car accident on the winding roads outside Florence. They had been married only 3 years, still planning their future, still talking about the children they would have someday. The pregnancy she had been secretly planning to announce never came to pass. Instead came 24 years of quiet mourning disguised as contentment, of channeling her maternal instincts into caring for other people's daughters. Buongiorno, Professoressa Morelli, came the cheerful voice of Signora Benedetti, her elderly colleague who taught art history. At 73, Maria Benedetti possessed the energy of someone half her age, and the wisdom to see through Elena's carefully constructed emotional barriers. Buongiorno, Maria, Elena replied, looking up from her lesson plans. How was your weekend? Magnificent. My grandson brought his new fidanzata to Sunday dinner. Such a lovely girl reminds me that life is for the living, not just the remembering. Maria's pointed look wasn't lost on Elena. This was a conversation they had danced around for years. Elena returned to her papers. I had a perfectly lovely weekend with Leopardi and a bottle of Chianti Classico. Leopardi has been dead for nearly 2 centuries, cara mia. Perhaps it's time to find company among the living? Before Elena could formulate her usual deflection, the morning bell rang, saving her from Maria's gentle interrogation. Students began filing into the hallway, their voices creating a familiar symphony of youth and possibility that Elena had grown to love over the years. Her first class was advanced Italian literature with the senior girls. These young women, aged 17 and 18, came from Florence's most established families. They wore their privilege lightly, most of them more interested in literature than their trust funds. Elena had taught many of their mothers, and even a few of their grandmothers. She was woven into the fabric of these families' lives, respected and trusted, yet always on the periphery. Today we'll discuss Petrarch's concept of courtly love, Elena began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had pondered these themes for decades. Who can tell me why the beloved in Petrarch's sonnets remains eternally distant? Sophia Bianchi raised her hand. At 17, she possessed an unusual maturity that set her apart from her classmates. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her school uniform was impeccably pressed. Unlike many of her peers, Sophia carried herself with quiet dignity rather than affected sophistication. "Because the poet's love is idealized," Sophia answered thoughtfully. "The distance preserves the perfection of his feelings. If he possessed the beloved, reality might diminish the beauty of his devotion." Elena nodded approvingly. "Excellent, Sophia. And what does this tell us about the nature of longing? That sometimes we prefer the safety of dreams to the risk of reality." The answer struck Elena more deeply than she expected. Here was this perceptive young woman, barely on the threshold of adult life, articulating truths that Elena had spent decades avoiding. She cleared her throat and moved on to discuss meter and rhyme scheme, safer territory that wouldn't challenge her so personally. After classes ended, Elena retreated to her apartment in the Santo Spirito district. The third-floor walk-up overlooked the Arno River, with windows that caught the afternoon light and revealed glimpses of the Ponte Vecchio in the distance. She had moved here after Antonio's death, unable to remain in the house they had chosen together, yet unwilling to leave Florence entirely. Rosa Martinelli, her housekeeper and closest friend, was waiting with tea and fresh pastries from the local bakery. At 68, Rosa had worked for Elena for 15 years, ever since her own husband had passed. They had found in each other the companionship of women who understood loss without needing to discuss it constantly. "How were the young ladies today?" Rosa asked, settling into her favorite chair by the window. "Insightful, as always." Sophia Bianchi made a particularly astute observation about Petrarch. "Ah, the Bianchi girl. Such lovely manners. Her father raises her well, considering." Elena looked up from her tea. "Considering what?" Rosa waved her hand dismissively. "Nothing specific, Cara, just that it's not easy raising a daughter alone. He seems devoted to her education, though. Always asks detailed questions about her progress when I see him at the market." "You've met him? Marco Bianchi?" "Oh yes, he shops at the same places we do. Surprising for a man of his position. Very courteous, always impeccably dressed. Treats the shopkeepers with respect, which says something about character." Elena filed this information away. She rarely encountered parents outside the formal structure of school events. Her world had grown small over the years, circumscribed by routine and the safety of familiar boundaries. That evening, Elena followed her customary ritual. She prepared a simple dinner of pasta with fresh vegetables from the market, paired with a glass of local wine. She ate at her small dining table, surrounded by stacks of student papers and the comforting presence of her books. As darkness fell over Florence, she lit a single candle and opened her leather-bound poetry collection. Antonio's handwriting greeted her like a ghost made of ink. In the margins of Neruda's verses, he had written, "This reminds me of how you looked this morning, and with sunlight in your hair." The memory was so vivid she could almost feel his presence in the room. She traced the words with her finger, remembering the young woman she had been, full of dreams and possibilities. The phone rang, interrupting her reverie. It was her sister Francesca, calling from Rome. "Elena, I've been thinking about you all day. How are you truly?" "I'm well, Franci. Busy with school, happy with my routine. Routine isn't the same as happiness. When was the last time you went somewhere new, met someone interesting, took a chance on anything?" Elena sighed. At 48, Francesca was 4 years younger, but infinitely more adventurous. She had remarried 3 years ago and was constantly encouraging Elena to put herself back out there, as if dating were as simple as ordering coffee. "I'm content, sister. Not everyone needs constant excitement. Content is what we settle for when we're afraid to reach for joy." After they said goodbye, Elena sat in the gathering darkness, considering Francesca's words. Was she content, or was she simply afraid? The distinction seemed important, though she wasn't ready to examine it too closely. Later, as she prepared for bed, Elena caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Her dark hair, now threaded with silver, was still thick and lustrous. Her hazel eyes held intelligence and kindness, and her figure remained trim from years of walking Florence's hills. She wasn't unattractive, merely invisible, a state she had cultivated deliberately. The parent-teacher conferences were scheduled for the following week. Elena had already prepared detailed reports on each student's progress, recommendations for summer reading, and thoughtful observations about their intellectual development. These meetings were among her favorite professional duties, offering glimpses into the family dynamics that shaped her students. As she drifted off to sleep, Elena thought about Sofia Bianchi's insight into Petrarch's distant beloved. Perhaps there was wisdom in maintaining safe distances, in preserving the perfection of idealized relationships. But as sleep claimed her, she wondered what might happen if someone were brave enough to bridge that distance, to risk the imperfection of reality for the possibility of genuine connection. The next morning brought rain to Florence, the kind of gentle precipitation that made the ancient stones glisten and filled the air with the scent of wet earth and blooming flowers. Elena walked to school under her burgundy umbrella, nodding to shopkeepers opening their doors for the day. This was her world, predictable, safe, and quietly beautiful. But sometimes, in the space between sleeping and waking, she still dreamed of setting the table for two. The day of parent-teacher conferences arrived with unseasonable warmth for October. Elena had arranged her classroom carefully, positioning two chairs at angles that encouraged conversation while maintaining professional distance. Fresh flowers from the school garden graced her desk, and she had prepared individual portfolios showcasing each student's best work. Her morning meetings proceeded smoothly, concerned mothers discussing summer programs, proud fathers beaming over academic achievements, the usual requests for additional reading recommendations. Elena found herself glancing at the clock, noting that Marco Bianchi's appointment was scheduled for 4 o'clock, the final meeting of the day. At precisely 4, she heard footsteps in the hallway. The knock on her door was neither tentative nor demanding, but rather carried the confidence of someone accustomed to being welcomed. "Professor Morelli?" "Marco Bianchi. Thank you for making time to discuss Sofia's progress." Elena looked up and felt her breath catch slightly. The man standing in her doorway was not what she had expected. In his early 60s, Marco Bianchi possessed the kind of understated elegance that spoke of quality rather than ostentation. His charcoal suit was impeccably tailored, his silver hair perfectly groomed, and his dark eyes held an intelligence that seemed to take in everything at once. Most striking was his bearing the quiet authority of someone who commanded respect without demanding it. "Please, come in. I'm delighted to meet you at last. Sofia speaks of you often, and with such obvious affection." Marco settled into the chair across from her desk, his movements economical and graceful. As he reached into his jacket for a notepad, Elena noticed the expensive fountain pen. He withdrew silver with intricate engravings that caught the afternoon light. "Sofia is very fortunate to have you as her teacher," he began, his voice carrying the cultured accent of educated Florentines. "Her enthusiasm for literature has grown tremendously this year. She quotes your lessons at dinner." Elena felt a flush of professional pride. "She's an exceptional student. Her insights into classical texts are remarkably mature. Just yesterday, she made a profound observation about Petrarch's concept of idealized love." Yes. She mentioned that discussion. Something about preferring the safety of dreams to the risk of reality. Marco's eyes held hers with an intensity that made Elena's pulse quicken slightly. Exactly. It was quite perceptive for someone her age. "Perhaps, though I've come to believe that some risks are worth taking, regardless of age." He made a note with his silver pen, the scratch of metal on paper creating an intimate sound in the quiet classroom. "Tell me, what are your thoughts on Sofia's university preparations?" For the next 20 minutes, they discussed Sofia's academic strengths, potential areas for improvement, and universities that might suit her interests. Marco listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that revealed genuine engagement with his daughter's education. Elena found herself relaxing, enjoying the conversation with this articulate, obviously devoted father. "May I ask a personal question, Professor?" Marco's tone had shifted slightly, becoming more conversational. Elena nodded, curious about this change in direction. "You've been teaching here for many years. Do you have children of your own?" The question was gently asked, but it still caused Elena's chest to tighten. "No, I don't. I was married young, but my husband passed away before we could start a family. I'm sorry for your loss." "How long has it been?" 24 years. The number sounded larger when spoken aloud. Marco was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "I lost my wife 8 years ago. Cancer. It's difficult to rebuild after such loss. I imagine so. Sophia never mentions her mother, but I sense the absence. She was very young when Maria died. Sometimes I wonder if I've done right by her, raising her alone. A daughter needs a mother's guidance, especially as she approaches womanhood." Elena felt a stir of sympathy for this man, carrying the weight of single parenthood. "From what I observe, you've done an admirable job. Sophia is poised, thoughtful, and kind, qualities that reflect excellent parenting. You're generous to say so." Marco leaned forward slightly, his gaze becoming more direct. "May I speak candidly, Professor?" "Of course. I find myself in an unusual position. My business requires a certain respectability, social standing, the support of someone who understands discretion and propriety. At the same time, I have children who need stability, guidance from someone with wisdom and character." Elena felt a flutter of confusion. "I'm not sure I understand what you're asking." Marco set down his pen and folded his hands. "What I'm asking, Professor Morelli, is whether you might consider a proposition that could benefit us both. You clearly have so much to offer a family: your education, your grace, your obvious capacity for caring. In return, I could offer you the family life that circumstances denied you." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge. Elena wasn't sure she dared cross. "Mr. Bianchi, I think there may be some misunderstanding. I'm proposing marriage, Professor, a partnership based on mutual respect and practical benefits, rather than romantic declarations. I need a wife who can help legitimize my family's position in Florence society. You, I believe, might welcome the opportunity to be part of a family again." Elena's mind reeled. This distinguished man, this concerned father, was proposing marriage to a woman he had met 30 minutes ago? This is highly irregular. We barely know each other. True. But consider this: how many marriages begin with grand passion only to fail when reality intrudes? What I'm suggesting is a foundation built on honesty and mutual advantage. We're both adults who understand disappointment. Perhaps that's a stronger basis than youthful romanticism. Elena stood abruptly, needing distance to process this extraordinary proposal. She walked to the window, looking out at the courtyard where shadows were lengthening in the late afternoon Sunday. "You mentioned your business requires respectability. What exactly do you do, Mr. Bianchi?" There was a pause before he answered, and when he spoke, his voice carried new gravity. "I manage certain family enterprises that have been part of Florence for generations. Traditional businesses that value loyalty and discretion above all else." Elena turned to face him, noting how carefully he had chosen his words. "Traditional businesses? Yes. Perhaps we could discuss the details at another time, when you've had a chance to consider my proposal." Something in his tone warned her not to press further, at least not now. The weight of his presence, the careful way he spoke about his work, the mention of needing respectability, pieces of a puzzle she wasn't sure she wanted to solve. "This is a great deal to take in, Mr. Bianchi. I would need time to consider." "Of course. Take all the time you need. May I suggest we meet again in a few days? Perhaps over dinner, somewhere we could speak more privately?" Elena found herself nodding before her rational mind could object. "Yes, I suppose that would be appropriate." Marco rose, gracefully, collecting his notepad and silver pen. "Thank you for your time today, Professor, and for your dedication to Sophia's education. She's fortunate to have someone who truly sees her potential." As he reached the door, he turned back. One more thing, what I've proposed may seem sudden, but it's not impulsive. I've been observing Sophia's transformation this year, seeing how she speaks of you, watching the confidence you've helped her develop. I believe you could bring that same positive influence to our entire family." After he left, Elena sank into her chair, staring at the spot where he had Saturday. The lingering scent of expensive cologne mingled with the fading aroma of the morning's coffee. Had she truly just received a marriage proposal from a man she'd met less than an hour ago? That evening, Elena found herself unable to concentrate on her usual routine. She prepared dinner mechanically, her thoughts circling around Marco Bianchi's extraordinary proposition. The rational part of her mind insisted this was madness. Respectable widows did not accept marriage proposals from virtual strangers. But another part, the part that had grown weary of solitude and stillness, whispered that perhaps madness was exactly what her carefully ordered life needed. She thought of Sophia, of the girl's obvious intelligence and hunger for guidance. She considered her own empty apartment, her nights spent in conversation with dead poets, her growing certainty that she would live and die alone. Perhaps there were worse fates than an unconventional marriage to an intriguing stranger who needed her as much as she needed him. Elena spent the next 3 days in a state of emotional suspension, moving through her daily routines while her mind wrestled with Marco Bianchi's proposition. She found herself studying Sophia with new eyes during literature class, searching for clues about her father's character in the girl's behavior and comments. On Wednesday evening, Rosa noticed Elena's distraction while they shared their customary tea. "You've been somewhere else entirely these past few days, Cara. What's troubling you?" Elena set down her cup, considering how much to reveal. "I received an unusual proposal the other day from Sophia Bianchi's father." Rosa's eyebrows rose. "A proposal? What kind of proposal?" "Marriage." The older woman nearly dropped her pastry. "Madonna mia!" After one meeting, it wasn't romantic. He presented it as a practical arrangement. He needs a respectable wife to help with his social standing, and he suggested I might benefit from having a family again. Rosa was quiet for a long moment, studying Elena's face. "And what do you think of this idea?" "I think it's absolutely mad. People don't marry strangers based on practical considerations, not in this century. Don't they? My grandmother's marriage was arranged by her parents. She never met my grandfather until their wedding day. They were together 47 years and raised 6 children who all adored them both." Elena stared at her friend. "That was different. That was tradition, family arrangements. Was it so different? 2 people agreeing to build something together based on mutual respect rather than passion? Sometimes passion fades, Elena. Respect and partnership can grow stronger with time." That night, Elena walked to Santo Spirito's ancient cemetery, where Antonio rested beneath a simple marble headstone. She had not visited in months, finding that her conversations with his memory were more vivid in their apartment among his books than here among the silent stones. "I don't know what you would think of this," she whispered to the gathering darkness. "A practical marriage to a man I barely know. It feels like betrayal, but also like the only chance I'll ever have for the family we planned together." The October wind rustled through the cypress trees, carrying the scent of late-blooming jasmine. Elena closed her eyes and tried to summon Antonio's voice, his guidance, but found only the echo of her own uncertainty. The next morning brought clarity in an unexpected form. Elena was reviewing essays on Dante's concept of earthly versus divine love when she came across Sophia's work. The girl had written with unusual passion about the poet's journey from despair to redemption, focusing particularly on the role of Beatrice as both inspiration and guide. "What strikes me most," Sophia had written, "is that Dante's salvation comes not from abandoning his past love, but from allowing it to transform into something deeper and more lasting. Perhaps true wisdom lies in understanding that different kinds of love serve different purposes in our lives." Elena read the passage 3 times, struck by its maturity and insight. Here was a 17-year-old girl who understood something about love's complexity that Elena had been struggling to grasp for decades. The realization prompted her to do something she hadn't done in years: research. That afternoon, she visited the public library and carefully researched what she could find about the Bianchi family. The information was limited but intriguing. Marco Bianchi was listed as the director of several import businesses, real estate holdings, and charitable foundations. His late wife, Maria Santini Bianchi, had been from an old Florentine family. There were photographs from various cultural events, gallery openings, opera premieres, charity galas, showing a distinguished couple who moved easily in Florence's social circles. What struck Elena most was a photograph from 5 years ago at a children's hospital fundraiser. Marco stood beside a large donation check, but his attention was focused on Sofia, then about 12, who was reading to a young patient. The expression on his face was unmistakably paternal, proud, protective, tender. This was not the look of a man who viewed family as merely a business arrangement. There were also references to his sons, Luca and Alessandro, though they appeared less frequently in social photographs. The few images showed handsome young men in their 20s, but Elena sensed tension in their formal poses beside their father. The research yielded one troubling detail: mentions of traditional family enterprises and old Florentine business practices that seemed deliberately vague. When Elena tried to find more specific information about the nature of his businesses, she encountered the same careful language Marco had used. Whatever he did, it required discretion. Friday evening brought the call she had been both anticipating and dreading. "Professor Morelli?" "Marco Bianchi. I hope I'm not disturbing your evening." Elena's pulse quickened at the sound of his cultured voice. "Not at all. I was grading papers. I was wondering if you've had time to consider our conversation. Perhaps we could meet for dinner tomorrow evening. There's a quiet restaurant in Oltrarno that might suit our discussion." Elena found herself agreeing before she could overthink the decision. "Yes, I think that would be helpful." "Excellent. Shall I collect you at 7? If you're comfortable sharing your address." After providing her information, Elena hung up the phone and immediately began second-guessing her decision. What was she doing? This was madness, pure and simple. Respectable literature professors did not entertain marriage proposals from mysterious businessmen, no matter how distinguished or devoted to their daughters. But as she lay in bed that night, Elena found herself thinking not about the madness of the situation, but about the photograph of Marco watching his daughter read to the sick child. There had been something in his expression that reminded her of how Antonio used to look at her when she was absorbed in teaching or reading, a mixture of admiration and protective tenderness that suggested deep capacity for love. Perhaps Rosa was right. Perhaps respect and partnership were not such terrible foundations for marriage. Perhaps the chance for family, even unconventionally gained, was worth the risk of stepping outside her carefully constructed safety. On Saturday morning, Elena stood before her wardrobe, trying to decide what one wore to dinner with a potential husband. The thought was so surreal she almost laughed. Finally, she chose a simple black dress with a string of pearls Antonio had given her for their second anniversary. If she was going to discuss the future, she would carry the best of her past with her. As evening approached, Elena found herself unexpectedly nervous. She had not dined alone with a man other than Antonio in 24 years. The prospect was both terrifying and exhilarating. At precisely 7 o'clock, her doorbell rang. Through the window, she could see Marco standing beside a sleek but understated sedan, dressed in a dark suit that emphasized his distinguished bearing. He looked up at her window and smiled, the first truly warm expression she had seen from him. Elena took a deep breath, collected her purse, and prepared to discover whether Marco Bianchi's proposition was the answer to her loneliness or the beginning of complications she couldn't yet imagine. The restaurant Marco had chosen was a hidden gem in the Oltrarno district, tucked away in a narrow street that tourists rarely discovered. Il Convivio, occupied the ground floor of a 15th-century palazzo, its intimate dining room lit by candles and filled with the soft murmur of sophisticated conversation. Marco stood as Elena approached their corner table, his gesture of old-world courtesy somehow putting her at ease. "You look lovely, Elena. May I call you Elena?" "Yes, of course, and thank you for choosing such a beautiful place." As they settled into their seats, Elena noticed how naturally Marco commanded attention without demanding it. The waitstaff showed him the deference reserved for valued patrons, yet he treated them with genuine courtesy rather than dismissive superiority. "I thought we might begin with some wine," Marco suggested, indicating a bottle that was already breathing on the table. "This is from a vineyard my family has supported for 3 generations. Nothing pretentious, but honest and well-crafted." Elena accepted the glass he poured, noting the label she didn't recognize. "Your family has deep roots in Florence." "Yes, though not all of those roots grow in soil others might consider entirely respectable." Marco's directness surprised her. "Before we discuss anything further, I think you deserve honesty about who I am and what I'm proposing." Elena set down her wine glass, sensing they had reached the heart of their conversation. "My family has been involved in various enterprises for over a century," Marco continued, his voice low but clear. "Some have always been legitimate real estate, import businesses, charitable foundations. Others operated in grey areas that modern society finds troubling." "What kind of grey areas?" Marco was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Protection services for local businesses, mediation of disputes that couldn't be resolved through official channels, facilitation of agreements that required discretion. My grandfather and father believed they were providing stability in unstable times." Elena felt her stomach tighten as understanding dawned. "You're talking about organized crime. I'm talking about family traditions that I've spent the last decade trying to legitimize completely. My sons, however, have different ideas about honor and tradition. They see my efforts as betrayal of their heritage." The waitress appeared to take their order, providing a welcome interruption that allowed Elena to process this revelation. "When they were alone again," Marco continued, "this is why I need someone like you, Elena, someone with unquestioned respectability and genuine character. My transformation of the family businesses requires social legitimacy that I cannot achieve alone." "And in return, what exactly are you offering me?" Marco reached into his jacket and withdrew a small velvet box. Elena's breath caught as he placed it on the table between them. "Security, family, the opportunity to be a mother to Sophia and perhaps eventually to guide my sons toward better choices." He opened the box to reveal an exquisite emerald ring surrounded by diamonds. "This belonged to my grandmother. She wore it for 43 years of marriage to a man who gave her 6 children and unwavering devotion." Elena stared at the ring, its green fire catching the candlelight. "You're offering me a family heirloom after knowing me for 1 week? I'm offering you a partnership that could benefit us both profoundly. The ring represents the sincerity of my proposal, not romantic passion. We're both old enough to understand the difference. What would be expected of me? In practical terms, companionship at social functions, a maternal presence for Sophia as she navigates her final year of school and university preparations. Eventually, perhaps, guidance for my sons, though they may resist initially. And the marriage itself? The intimate aspects?" Marco's expression grew thoughtful. "We would begin as partners sharing a household, but maintaining separate quarters. What develops beyond that would be entirely by mutual consent, if anything develops at all." Elena found herself studying his face, searching for deception or calculation. Instead, she saw patience and what appeared to be genuine hope. "Why me, Marco? Surely there are other women in Florence who could provide what you're seeking. There are women who would marry me for money or status. There are women who would tolerate my past for the sake of my present position. But you're the first woman I've met who loves my daughter's mind, who brings out her best qualities, who possesses both strength and gentleness. Their meal arrived simple, perfectly prepared dishes that allowed conversation to continue without distraction. As they ate, Marco spoke about his vision for legitimizing his businesses, his concerns about Sofia's future, and his regrets about the legacy he might leave his sons. "What happened to your wife?" Elena asked gently. Marco's expression grew distant. "Cancer. She fought it for 2 years, with courage I didn't know was possible. Near the end, she made me promise to find love again, to give the children a mother's influence. I thought she was talking about romance. But now I wonder if she meant something broader, the kind of partnership that creates stability and growth." Elena thought of her own promise to Antonio, made in the hospital the night before he died. "Live fully," he had whispered. "Don't preserve your life like a museum exhibit. Live it." "This arrangement," Elena said carefully, "it would be legal marriage, not some temporary agreement." "Completely legal. I would expect a prenuptial agreement protecting your interests as well as mine. You would have financial security regardless of what happens between us personally. And if it doesn't work, if we find ourselves incompatible, then we would part as friends, with your security intact and my gratitude for whatever time we shared." Elena lifted the emerald ring from its velvet nest, feeling its substantial weight. The setting was vintage but timeless, the kind of piece that spoke of family history and enduring commitment. "I need more time to consider this fully." "Of course, but may I ask, is the concept itself impossible for you, or simply the speed at which it's happening?" Elena met his gaze directly. "The concept terrifies me because it makes sense, because I can see how it might work, how it might give us both things we've lost." "But you're asking me to trust a stranger with my entire future?" Marco nodded slowly. "Fair enough. What if I told you that trust works both ways? I'm entrusting you with knowledge that could destroy everything I've worked to build. That suggests I already trust you considerably." As they prepared to leave, Marco placed the ring box in Elena's hand. "Keep this while you decide. If you choose to accept, it's yours. If not, please return it when you're ready." Walking to his car, Elena felt the weight of possibility in her palm, heavier than the emerald and infinitely more precious. Elena spent Sunday morning at the kitchen table, staring at the emerald ring beside her coffee cup. Sunlight streaming through her apartment windows made the stone dance with green fire, beautiful and somehow alive. She had barely slept, her mind circling endlessly around Marco's proposition. The phone rang, interrupting her contemplation. Francesca's voice carried across the line from Rome, bright with sisterly intuition. "You sound different, Elena. Something's happened. I've received a marriage proposal." The silence stretched so long, Elena wondered if the connection had failed. Finally, Francesca spoke, her voice carefully controlled. "From whom?" "Sofia Bianchi's father, Marco. The parent you met this week?" "Elena, have you lost your mind completely?" Elena found herself defending the idea, even as part of her agreed with Francesca's assessment. "It's not as impulsive as it sounds. It's a practical arrangement that could benefit us both." "Practical? Marriage isn't a business contract, Elena. What do you know about this man besides the fact that he has a daughter in your class?" Elena told her sister about the dinner, about Marco's honesty regarding his family background, about the emerald ring now sitting on her table. She found herself emphasizing his devotion to Sofia, his desire to legitimize his business interests, his patient approach to their arrangement. "He's involved with organized crime, and you're considering marrying him?" Francesca's voice rose. "Elena, this isn't some romantic novel. This is dangerous. He's trying to move away from that life. And besides, what's my alternative? Growing old alone, having imaginary conversations with Antonio's ghost, dying among my books with no one to mourn me but Rosa." The words surprised Elena with their bitterness. She hadn't realized how deeply her loneliness ran until she spoke it aloud. Francesca's tone softened. "Oh, cara mia, is that really how you see your life?" "Sometimes, more often lately." Elena picked up the ring, feeling its cool weight against her palm. Marco is offering me a chance to be part of something larger than my solitude, a family, purpose beyond my classroom, but marriage to a stranger. Antonio was nearly a stranger when I married him. We had known each other 6 months, most of it in groups with other university students. What we built came after marriage, not before. Monday brought Elena's decision with startling clarity. She was reviewing lesson plans when Sophia approached her desk after class, her usual composure replaced by obvious distress. "Professoressa, may I speak with you privately?" "Of course, Sophia. What's troubling you?" The girl's eyes filled with tears she was trying desperately to control. "My father mentioned he had dinner with you Saturday night. He wouldn't tell me why, but he seemed hopeful about something. I wondered if perhaps he had spoken about me, about my academic future." Elena set down her pen, struck by the vulnerability in Sophia's voice. "Why does this worry you?" "Because everyone leaves eventually. My mother died when I was 9. My brothers barely tolerate home anymore. They think Papa is weak for trying to change our family's reputation. If you disapprove of something about me, if Papa has to choose between his business associates and my education." The girl's words trailed off, but Elena understood. Sophia lived in fear of abandonment, of being the reason relationships failed. "Sophia, look at me." Elena waited until the girl met her eyes. "Whatever conversations your father and I might have, they have nothing to do with disapproval of you. You are a remarkable young woman with a brilliant mind and a kind heart. Anyone would be honored to be part of your life." Relief flooded Sophia's features. "Then you're not. You wouldn't want to stop being my teacher." Never. In fact, I hope to be part of your life for a very long time." That afternoon, Elena called Marco from her apartment. "I've made my decision," she said without preamble. "And, yes, I accept your proposal." The silence that followed was filled with weight relief, anticipation, perhaps fear on both their parts. "I'm honored by your trust, Elena. When would you like to proceed?" "As soon as practical. If we're going to do this, I see no benefit in lengthy delays." "Agreed. Would next Saturday be too soon for a civil ceremony?" "Something simple, with just necessary witnesses." Elena closed her eyes, feeling the ground shift beneath her feet. "Saturday would be fine. There are practical matters to discuss: living arrangements, financial considerations, your preferences for the ceremony." "Yes, of course." "Elena?" Marco's voice carried new gentleness. "Are you certain? Once we sign the marriage certificate, there's no pretending this was simply an interesting conversation." "I'm certain." Terrified, but certain. That evening, Elena told Rosa about her decision. The older woman listened without interruption, her weathered hands busy with mending, while Elena explained the arrangements they had discussed. "You're going to marry him," Rosa said finally. It wasn't a question. "Good. You've been half alive too long, Cara. Better to risk everything for the chance of happiness than to preserve nothing forever." The week passed in a blur of practical arrangements. Elena met with a lawyer Marco recommended to review the prenuptial agreement, which proved surprisingly generous in protecting her interests. She gave notice at her apartment, though the lease wouldn't expire until the end of the school year. She selected a simple cream-colored dress for the ceremony and spoke with Signora Benedetti about assuming some of her administrative duties at the academy. Friday evening, Elena packed a single suitcase with immediate necessities. Tomorrow, she would become Signora Bianchi, wife to a man she barely knew, stepmother to children who didn't yet know she existed. The emerald ring sat in its box on her dresser, waiting to be joined by a wedding band. As she folded her nightgown, the same simple cotton she had worn throughout her widowhood, Elena wondered what Marco expected of a wife who was also a stranger. Would they share meals, conversation? Would he eventually want more than companionship from their arrangement? The questions would be answered soon enough. Tomorrow, Elena Morelli would cease to exist. In her place would be Elena Bianchi, married woman, stepmother, partner in an enterprise she didn't yet fully understand. The wedding certificate would make their union legal, but Elena suspected the real marriage, the building of trust and partnership, would begin the day after, when they started the complex process of becoming a family. The civil ceremony took place on a crisp Saturday morning in October at Florence's Palazzo Vecchio, witnessed by Rosa and Marco's longtime attorney, Giuseppe Torriani. Elena wore her cream dress with the emerald engagement ring, feeling both surreal and strangely calm as she spoke vows that bound her to this distinguished stranger. Marco had chosen a simple gold band to match hers, and when he slipped it onto her finger, his touch was gentle and reassuring. The kiss that sealed their marriage was brief and respectful, a formal acknowledgement of their new status rather than a romantic gesture. "Signora Bianchi," Marco said softly as they signed the wedding certificate, his voice carrying something that might have been wonder. "It will take time to grow accustomed to that," Elena replied, her hand trembling slightly as she wrote her new name. Marco's villa sat on a hillside overlooking Florence, surrounded by ancient olive groves and formal gardens that spoke of generations of careful cultivation. As their car wound up the gravel drive, Elena felt her breath catch at the sight of the honey-colored stone facade, its Renaissance architecture perfectly preserved and lovingly maintained. "It's beautiful, Marco. How long has it been in your family?" "Since 1847. My great-great-grandfather purchased it from a count who had fallen on difficult times. Each generation has added their own touches while preserving its essential character." The staff who greeted them clearly knew about the marriage, though Elena sensed their curiosity about their employer's sudden wife. The housekeeper, Signora Alberti, welcomed Elena with warm professionalism and showed her to a beautifully appointed suite in the villa's east wing. "These were the late Signora's rooms," she explained, opening the windows to let in the afternoon light. "Signor Bianchi thought you might prefer them, but if you would like different accommodations." "These are lovely, thank you." Elena admired the sitting room with its silk-covered chairs and writing desk positioned to overlook the gardens. The bedroom beyond was elegantly furnished with antique pieces that managed to feel comfortable rather than museum-like. "Signor Bianchi's rooms are in the west wing," Signora Alberti continued tactfully. "He asked me to assure you that your privacy will be completely respected." That evening, Elena joined Marco for dinner in the villa's smaller dining room, a more intimate space than the grand formal room she had glimpsed earlier. Candles flickered on the polished table set for two, and fresh flowers from the garden provided a centerpiece that felt welcoming rather than ostentatious. "How are you finding everything?" Marco asked as life. They shared an excellent local wine, overwhelming and beautiful in equal measure. "I keep expecting to wake up and find this has all been an elaborate dream." "I understand the feeling. May I show you something after dinner?" Marco led her through corridors lined with family portraits to a room Elena hadn't seen earlier. Her gasp of delight was audible as she stepped into what could only be described as a private library. Floor-to-ceiling shelves held thousands of volumes, their leather spines creating a warm tapestry of browns and burgundies. Comfortable reading chairs were positioned near tall windows, and a fireplace promised cozy winter evenings among the books. "My grandfather began this collection," Marco explained, watching Elena's face as she moved among the shelves. "Each generation has added to it. I thought, given your profession, you might find it appealing." Elena ran her fingers along the spines, recognizing rare editions of Italian classics alongside contemporary works in multiple languages. "This is extraordinary. Some of these books must be priceless." "Books are meant to be read, not preserved like museum pieces. Please consider this library yours to use as you wish." On the desk near the window sat a small, ornate music box. Marco noticed Elena's attention drawn to it. "That belonged to my late wife," he said quietly. "Maria loved music, though she could barely carry a tune herself. She collected music boxes from every place we traveled." Elena touched the box gently. "Would you mind if I—" Marco nodded, and Elena lifted the lid. A delicate melody filled the room, something classical and achingly beautiful. Inside, a tiny ballerina turned slowly, her painted face serene. "She's lovely," Elena whispered, struck by the intimacy of this glimpse into Marco's past marriage. Maria always said music boxes captured happiness and held it safe. She believed that, as long as the melody played, joy would remain in the house. They stood in comfortable silence, listening to the small, precise notes that spoke of love and loss and the continuation of life beyond sorrow. "Thank you for sharing this with me," Elena said, as the melody wound down. "I know it can't be easy, bringing another woman into spaces that hold such memories." Marco's expression grew thoughtful. "Maria made me promise not to turn our home into a shrine. She wanted life to continue here, wanted the villa to be filled with family and laughter again. I think she would approve of you, Elena." Their conversation that evening ranged from books to travel to their hopes for Sophia's future. Elena found herself relaxing into the rhythm of companionship with this complex man who seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. Over the following week, Elena established new routines that blended her professional life with her role as Marco's wife. She continued teaching at the academy, but now returned each evening to the villa, where she and Marco shared dinner and increasingly comfortable conversation. Sophia's delight at having Elena as part of the household was evident but carefully controlled. The girl had clearly been taught not to expect permanence from the adults in her life, but Elena noticed her gradual relaxation as the days passed without crisis or departure. "Papa seems different since you married," Sophia confided one afternoon as they worked together in the garden. "Lighter, somehow, more like he was when Mama was alive." Elena felt a warmth spread through her chest at this observation. Perhaps she was bringing some value to this strange arrangement after all. The first test of their public partnership came the following Saturday, when Marco asked Elena to accompany him to a gallery opening hosted by one of Florence's most prominent cultural institutions. She chose a simple black dress and the emerald ring, feeling both nervous and curious about their debut as a married couple. The evening proved surprisingly pleasant. Marco moved through the crowd with easy confidence, introducing Elena as his wife with obvious pride. She found herself genuinely enjoying conversations about art and literature with Florence's cultural elite, many of whom knew her by reputation from the academy. "You're a natural at this," Marco murmured as they admired a particularly striking painting. "You put people at ease while commanding their respect." As they drove home through Florence's glittering night, Elena reflected on how seamlessly she seemed to be settling into this new life. The villa felt increasingly like home. Her relationship with Marco was deepening into genuine friendship, and Sophia was blossoming under her attention. Perhaps Rosa had been right. Perhaps respect and partnership truly were sufficient foundations for a marriage that could grow into something beautiful. 3 weeks into their marriage, Elena's carefully constructed new world shattered with the arrival of a single envelope. She was grading papers in her classroom after school when she noticed the plain white envelope slipped under her office door. No postmark, no return address, just her name written in block letters that somehow managed to look threatening despite their simplicity. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message that made her blood run cold. "The professor's husband has many enemies. Pretty wives make such convenient targets. Watch yourself, Signora Bianchi. Florence can be dangerous for those who don't understand the rules." Elena's hands trembled as she read the words again, searching for some indication this was a cruel joke or mistake. But the weight of the paper, the deliberate placement, the use of her married name, everything suggested this threat was deadly serious. She drove home to the villa in a state of shock, the letter burning like fire in her purse. Marco was in his study when she arrived, speaking quietly into his phone in rapid Italian that she couldn't quite follow. When he saw her face, he ended the call immediately. "Elena, what's happened?" She handed him the letter without speaking. She watched his expression transform as he read from concern to fury to something much more dangerous. When did you receive this? An hour ago. It was slipped under my classroom door. Elena sank into a chair, suddenly feeling the full weight of what she had gotten herself into. Marco, who would send something like this? What enemies? Marco was already reaching for his phone, but he stopped when he saw Elena's stricken expression. He came to kneel beside her chair, his hands gentle on hers. Elena, I need you to listen to me carefully. This changes everything about your safety. I should have anticipated this, should have protected you better from the beginning. Protected me from what? You said you were legitimizing your businesses, moving away from the old ways. I am. But that transition has made me enemies among people who profit from the old systems. Some see my marriage as a sign of weakness, evidence that I'm becoming soft. Elena pulled her hands away, standing to pace the length of his study. What aren't you telling me, Marco? What exactly did your family do that creates enemies who threaten literature teachers? Marco was quiet for a long moment, weighing his words. My father controlled several territories in Florence, businesses that paid for protection, disputes that were settled outside the courts, loans that carried particular types of interest. I inherited those responsibilities 8 years ago. You mean extortion, illegal gambling, loan sharking? Among other things, yes, but I've been systematically transferring those operations to legitimate businesses or ending them entirely. Unfortunately, that process has created a power vacuum that other families want to fill. Elena felt the room spinning slightly. Other families? There are other families like yours? 3 major ones, plus several smaller. Operations. The Torriani family has been our primary rival for decades. They see my transformation as an opportunity to expand their territory. As if summoned by his name, Giuseppe Torriani appeared in the doorway, but this wasn't the mild-mannered attorney who had witnessed their wedding. This man moved with deadly purpose and carried himself like someone accustomed to violence. Forgive the intrusion, Marco, but we have a problem. The Rossini family made contact an hour ago. They're claiming responsibility for the threat to your wife. Elena's knees nearly buckled. The Rossini family? Marco's expression grew grim. Our most dangerous rivals. They've been pushing to take over territory we've abandoned as we've gone legitimate. Why would they threaten me specifically? Giuseppe and Marco exchanged a look that Elena didn't like. Because, Marco said carefully, married to a respectable woman, I have something to lose. They believe threatening you will force me back into old patterns of retaliation that would destroy my legitimacy efforts. Elena stared at her husband because that's what he was, she realized with shock. Truly her husband now, the danger made their arrangement real. So I'm a target because I make you vulnerable. You're a target because they're testing whether I'll respond with violence or try to handle this through legal channels. Either choice serves their purposes. The study fell silent, except for the ticking of an antique clock on Marco's desk. Elena found herself thinking about Sophia, about the girl's fear that everyone eventually left. Was this how it would end? Would Elena flee back to her safe, solitary life, proving that trust was foolish and love was temporary? What would have happened if you had remained unmarried? She asked quietly. They would have found other pressure points. My children, my businesses, my efforts to build something legitimate. Marriage didn't create this conflict, Elena. It just gave it a more personal dimension. Elena walked to the window, overlooking the gardens, where she and Sophia had worked together just days ago. Everything looked the same, the olive trees, the formal hedges, the view of Florence in the distance. But she now understood that beauty could mask danger, that safety was always more fragile than it appeared. How do we handle this threat? Do you call the police? Giuseppe laughed bitterly. The police handle domestic disputes and tourist problems. This requires different solutions. What kind of solutions? Marco came to stand beside her at the window. That depends partly on you, Elena. If you want to leave, if this is too much to ask of you, I'll arrange protection until you can return to your old life safely. Elena turned to study his face. There was no pressure in his expression, No manipulation, just genuine concern for her well-being and what might have been disappointment at the possibility of her departure. And if I stay, then we face this together. We show them that threats won't drive us apart or force us back into old patterns. We prove that legitimate power is stronger than fear. But staying puts me in real danger. Yes, I won't lie to you about that. Elena thought about her conversation with Sophia, about people leaving, about the girl's careful hope that Elena might be different. She thought about Marco's library, their evening conversations, the way he had shared his late wife's music box with such trust. She thought about the alternative, returning to her empty apartment, her solitary dinners, her conversations with dead poets while life passed her by. What kind of protection are you talking about? Security measures that will become part of our daily routine, changes to your schedule at the academy, precautions that will be inconvenient but necessary. Elena nodded slowly. And the Rossini family? How do you plan to respond to their threat? Carefully, strategically, in ways that prove we're not intimidated but that don't give them excuse to escalate. Giuseppe stepped forward. Signora, you should understand this isn't just about you now. How Marco responds to this threat will determine whether his legitimacy efforts succeed or fail. If he handles this wrong, everything he's worked for could be destroyed. The weight of that responsibility settled on Elena's shoulders like a heavy cloak. She wasn't just choosing her own fate, but influencing the future of Marco's family, his business transformation, possibly even Sophia's safety and happiness. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course. But Elena, whatever you decide quickly. The longer we wait to respond, the more they'll interpret hesitation as weakness. That night, Elena lay awake in her beautiful room in the villa, listening to the night sounds of the Tuscan countryside and wondering whether she had the courage to stay in a world where literature teachers received death threats and marriage meant becoming a target. Elena woke before dawn with her decision crystallized. She found Marco in the kitchen, already dressed and nursing a cup of espresso while speaking quietly with Giuseppe. Both men looked up as she entered, their faces tense with the weight of unfinished business. I'm staying, she announced without preamble. But I want to understand exactly what we're facing and what my role will be. Relief flooded Marco's features. Are you certain? Once we commit to this path, I'm certain. Sophia needs stability, not another person who disappears when life becomes complicated. And you. She paused, surprising herself with the emotion in her voice. You trusted me with your family's future. The least I can do is trust you with mine. Giuseppe handed her a key that gleamed silver in the morning light. This is to a safe house in Fiesole. If anything happens here, if you feel threatened in any way, you go there immediately. No discussion, no delays. Elena took the key, feeling its weight as both protection and admission of genuine danger. What exactly does, if anything happens, mean? Unexpected visitors, suspicious activity around the villa or the academy, anyone asking questions about your routine or schedule. Marco's voice was grim but steady. I've arranged for discreet security at the school. They'll look like maintenance workers or substitute teachers, but they'll be watching. Over the next few days, Elena learned to live with the strange new rhythm of protected life. A different route to school each morning, security checks of her classroom before she arrived, the constant awareness that ordinary activities now carried extraordinary risks. But something unexpected happened during this period of heightened vigilance. Her relationship with Marco deepened in ways their original arrangement had never anticipated. Facing danger together created an intimacy that shared dinners and polite conversation couldn't match. You've surprised me, Marco told her one evening as they sat in the library, both pretending to read while actually listening for unusual sounds outside. How so? I expected you might stay out of duty or determination. I didn't expect you to become fierce about protecting what we're building here. Elena looked up from her book, a volume of Neruda's poetry that reminded her of happier, simpler times. Neither did I. But watching Sofia bloom with someone to trust, seeing how you've changed since having a true partner, I realized I'm not just protecting myself anymore. I'm protecting us. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Luca and Alessandro, Marco's sons, who had driven from Florence to discuss the family crisis. Elena had met them only briefly at a charity function the previous week, but now she saw them clearly for the first time. Luca, at 26, carried himself with the reckless confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences. His expensive clothes and flashy jewelry spoke of a young man more interested in appearance than substance. Alessandro, 2 years older, possessed his father's quiet intensity, but without the wisdom that came with age and responsibility. His eyes assessed Elena with barely concealed skepticism. "So this is the teacher who's convinced Papa to go soft," Luca said, his tone just short of openly insulting. "Luca," Marco's voice carried a warning that made his son step back slightly. "It's a fair question," Elena replied calmly. "And the answer is no. I haven't convinced your father of anything. He was already transforming his business practices when we met. I'm simply supporting his vision for the family's future." Alessandro studied her with new interest. "And what do you think that future should look like?" "Legitimate, successful, something Sofia can be proud of when she brings her own children to visit their grandfather." "What about honor?" Luca demanded. "What about loyalty to the family traditions that built everything we have?" Elena set down her book and looked directly at the young man. "Honor comes from protecting your family, not from perpetuating cycles of violence and fear. Your father is showing real courage by choosing a more difficult but ultimately more secure path." "Courage?" Luca laughed bitterly. "He's showing weakness. The Rossinis would never have dared threaten Papa's wife if they respected our strength." "The Rossinis threatened me because they're afraid of your father's strength," Elena countered. "They know that legitimacy will make him more powerful than violence ever could." Marco watched this exchange with something that might have been pride, while Giuseppe took notes that Elena suspected would become strategic plans. That weekend brought an unexpected ally in their struggle. Sofia, who had been carefully shielded from the worst details of the threat, nonetheless sensed the tension in the household. "Elena," she said as they worked together in the garden, "I know something is wrong. Everyone's being too careful around me, and Papa has that look he gets when he's worried about protecting us." Elena hesitated, unsure how much truth the girl could handle. "People sometimes try to hurt our family because of Papa's business," Sofia continued matter-of-factly. "It's happened before, but this feels different because you're here now." "Different how?" "Before, when there was trouble, Papa would get very quiet and distant. He'd make plans by himself and not tell us anything until it was over. But now he talks to you, asks your opinion. It's like he's not carrying everything alone anymore." The wisdom in Sofia's observation struck Elena forcefully. She was indeed sharing Marco's burdens now, becoming a true partner in ways their marriage contract had never specified. "Are you frightened?" Elena asked gently. "A little, but also hopeful. Papa is happier with you here, stronger somehow. And I think," Sofia paused, choosing her words carefully, "I think you love us now, really love us, not just because of the marriage arrangement." Elena's throat tightened with emotion. "Yes, Sofia, I really love you, all of you." That evening, Marco found Elena in the library with the safe house key in her hand, turning it over thoughtfully. "Second thoughts?" he asked, settling into the chair beside hers. "The opposite, actually. I was thinking about how much I have to lose now. When you first proposed, I had nothing to protect except my solitude. Now I have a family, a home, a future worth fighting for." Marco reached for her hand, their first truly intimate gesture since their wedding day. "Elena, when this is over, when we've dealt with the Rossinis and secured our position, I want you to know that what we've built together has become real for me. This marriage started as a business arrangement, but it's become something I never expected." Elena felt her heart racing at his words. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I've fallen in love with my wife. Not with the idea of having a respectable partner, but with you, specifically, your courage, your intelligence, the way you've embraced my complicated family and made us better than we were." Before Elena could respond, Giuseppe appeared in the doorway with an expression that immediately commanded attention. "They've made their move," he announced grimly. "The Rossinis have filed formal complaints against several of our legitimate businesses, claiming tax irregularities and permit violations. It's obvious harassment, but it will require significant legal resources to fight." Marco stood, his hand still holding Elena's. "And they've also approached Luca directly, offering him partnership in their operations if he breaks with you publicly." Elena felt the room grow cold. "What did Luca say?" "He told them he'd consider it." The betrayal hit Marco like a physical blow. Elena watched the pain flash across his face before being replaced by grim determination. "Then it's time to end this," he said quietly. "Giuseppe, contact our attorneys. Elena, we need to discuss what happens next." As Giuseppe left to make calls, Elena squeezed Marco's hand. "Whatever comes next, we face it together. Even if it means real danger, even if Luca chooses them over us." Elena thought of Sophia's faith, of the music box that played melodies of captured happiness, of the life they were building against all odds. "Especially then," she said firmly. "I didn't survive 24 years of loneliness to surrender the moment I found something worth keeping." The key to the safe house remained in her palm, but Elena no longer saw it as an escape route. It was insurance, protection for a family she was determined to defend. The confrontation came sooner than anyone expected. Elena was leaving the academy Tuesday afternoon when she noticed Luca's car in the parking lot, not unusual in itself, except that Sophia had mentioned he was supposed to be in Rome on business. Her instincts, sharpened by weeks of vigilance, told her something was wrong. She approached her own car cautiously, keys ready, when Luca emerged from the shadows between buildings. "Elena, we need to talk." His appearance shocked her. The cocky young man she had met weeks earlier looked haggard, his expensive clothes wrinkled, his eyes carrying the weight of decisions he wasn't mature enough to handle. "Luca, what are you doing here? Your father is expecting you." "My father is making a mistake that will get us all killed." His voice cracked with strain. "The Rossinis aren't just threatening you anymore. They've made it clear that if Papa doesn't return to the old ways, they'll eliminate our entire family as examples to other families considering legitimacy." Elena felt ice in her veins. "When did you learn this?" "This morning. They contacted me directly, said they'd spare Sophia and me if we publicly disavowed Papa's changes and joined their operation." Luca's hands shook as he lit a cigarette. "Elena, I don't want to betray my father, but I can't watch him get everyone killed for pride." "It's not pride, Luca. It's principle. Your father is trying to build something better. Better for who? We were feared and respected before. Now we're seen as weak, targets for every ambitious family in central Italy." Elena studied the young man's face, seeing not just fear but genuine confusion about right and wrong. "What do you want from me?" "Convince him to go back, at least temporarily, until we can negotiate from strength. You're the only one he listens to now." Before Elena could respond, two black sedans pulled into the parking lot with deliberate slowness. Elena recognized neither vehicle, but Luca's face went white with terror. "They followed me," he whispered. "Madonna, they followed me to you." Men emerged from both cars, 4 in total, dressed in dark suits that didn't quite conceal the weapons underneath. Elena's training from Giuseppe kicked in as she assessed escape routes and calculated distances. "Signora Bianchi," the leader called out, his voice carrying the cold courtesy of professional intimidation. "We've been hoping to meet you." Elena positioned herself so that Luca was partially behind her, though she wasn't sure he deserved protection at this point. "I have nothing to say to you." "Of course you do. You're going to tell your husband that his experiment in legitimacy ends now, tonight, or tomorrow's newspapers will carry some very sad stories about accidents that befall literature teachers." The threat was delivered with casual precision, as if discussing the weather. Elena felt fury rise alongside her fear. These men were treating her life as a negotiating chip in someone else's game. "And if I refuse to carry your message? Then you won't be going home to carry any messages at all." Elena heard Luca's sharp intake of breath behind her. This was the moment of truth, not just for her, but for everything Marco was trying to build. "You've made a serious miscalculation," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You assume Marco will respond to threats against me the way he would have responded to threats 5 years ago, but he's not the same man he was then." Meaning? Meaning he won't be drawn back into violent retaliation that destroys his legitimacy. He'll handle this through legal channels that will expose your operations to authorities you can't intimidate or corrupt. The leader's expression shifted slightly, revealing the first crack in his confidence. "Legal channels are slow, Signora. Accidents happen much faster." Elena reached into her purse, making the men tense, but withdrew only her phone. "Then you'd better hope I make it home safely, because Marco is expecting my call in exactly 10 minutes. If he doesn't receive it, you'll discover how efficiently legitimate businesses can cooperate with law enforcement." It was a bluff. She had no such arrangement with Marco, but her tone carried conviction that made the men hesitate. "Luca," she said without turning around, "get in my car, now." "Signora," the leader began. "You have your answer," Elena interrupted, moving toward her car with deliberate calm. "Tell your employers that Marco Bianchi doesn't negotiate with terrorists, and his wife doesn't either." As she drove away, with Luca slumped in the passenger seat, Elena's hands shook so violently she could barely grip the steering wheel. But she had done it face-down professional intimidation and emerged with both their lives intact. "Why did you protect me?" Luca asked quietly. "After what I told you about considering their offer?" Elena glanced at the young man who had nearly betrayed his family out of fear and confusion. "Because family means protecting each other, even when we make mistakes. That's what your father is trying to teach you." As they approached the villa, Elena saw Marco waiting in the driveway, Giuseppe beside him, both men's faces grim with the knowledge that the final confrontation was no longer avoidable. The time for negotiation and patience had ended. Whatever came next would determine not just their safety, but the future of everything they had tried to build together. Marco's face was a mask of controlled fury as Elena recounted the confrontation at the academy. Giuseppe took rapid notes while Luca sat in shameful silence, his brief moment of courage in the parking lot overshadowed by his earlier betrayal. "They forced our hand," Marco said finally, his voice deadly calm. "Giuseppe, contact Inspector Martelli. It's time to present our evidence." Elena looked between the two men, sensing undercurrents she didn't fully understand. "What evidence?" "For the past year, we've been documenting every illegal approach, every threat, every attempt by rival families to force us back into criminal activities," Giuseppe explained, his fingers already working. His phone. "We've been building a case for the authorities while simultaneously legitimizing our operations." "You've been working with the police all this time?" Elena felt a mixture of relief and bewilderment. Marco nodded grimly. "Not officially, but Inspector Martelli has been watching our transformation with interest. He understands that having one major family go completely legitimate is better than trying to prosecute all of them for ongoing crimes." Luca looked up sharply, his face pale with the implications. "You're going to turn evidence against other families? Papa, that's what law-abiding citizens do when threatened by criminals." Elena interrupted, her voice carrying newfound authority that surprised even her. "Your father isn't betraying anyone except people who've already betrayed any claim to honor or loyalty." The young man flinched at her words. But Elena saw something shift in his expression, perhaps the beginning of understanding about the difference between loyalty and complicity. Alessandro arrived within the hour, having driven at dangerous speeds from Florence when Giuseppe called him. Unlike his younger brother, Alessandro's face showed determination rather than fear, and Elena noticed he carried himself differently with purpose rather than merely inherited privilege. "I heard what happened at the school," he said to Elena, his tone respectful but warm. "I also heard how you handled it. Papa chose well." Elena felt warmth spread through her chest at this acceptance from Marco's elder son. "We're family, Alessandro. We protect each other." "Yes, which is why I'm here to tell you that Luca wasn't the only one the Rossinis approached." Alessandro's jaw tightened with anger that seemed more mature than his years. "They offered me partnership too, said I could take over Papa's territory if I eliminated the complications he'd brought into the family." Marco's expression grew dangerous, his hands clenching into fists before he consciously relaxed them. And I told them what they could do with their offer. But I also recorded the conversation. Alessandro produced a small digital recorder, handling it like precious evidence. "Everything they said about their plans for you, for Elena, for the family businesses, it's all here." Giuseppe's eyes lit up with professional satisfaction as he reached for the device. "This changes everything. With Luca's testimony about their direct threats and Alessandro's recording of their conspiracy proposals, we have enough evidence to destroy their operations entirely. But first," Marco said quietly, moving to the window to check the grounds, "we need to ensure Elena's safety while the authorities move. The Rossinis will escalate when they realize we're not backing down." Elena felt a chill of premonition. "How will they escalate?" "They'll come here," Marco replied grimly. "Tonight, most likely. They'll want to make one final attempt to force our compliance before we can present evidence to the authorities." As if summoned by his words, the villa's security system chimed with an urgent alert. Giuseppe checked his phone, and his face went pale with concern. Motion sensors at the main gate, 3 vehicles approaching fast. Marco was already moving with practiced efficiency, pressing a small object into Elena's hand. "The family crest ring," he said, his voice urgent but steady. "Wear this so everyone knows you're truly one of us, under our full protection." Elena looked down at the heavy gold ring bearing the Bianchi family seal, an ancient symbol featuring an eagle with outstretched wings, surrounded by olive branches, and the family motto, "Honoris causa," for honor's sake. As Marco slipped it onto her right hand beside her wedding band, she felt the weight of centuries of tradition and the responsibility that came with it. "Take Sofia to the safe room," Marco continued, his voice calm despite the approaching threat. "Giuseppe has the controls." "I'm not hiding while you face this alone," Elena protested, surprised by her own fierce protectiveness. "You're not hiding. You're protecting our daughter, while Alessandro, Luca, and I handle family business." Marco's eyes held hers intently, and she saw not just love, but complete trust in her capabilities. "Elena, trust me one more time." The sound of car doors slamming echoed from the courtyard, followed by voices that carried the harsh tones of men accustomed to intimidating others. Elena nodded, understanding that this was the moment everything would be decided: their marriage, their family's future, the success or failure of Marco's transformation. She found Sofia in the library, calmly reading Dante's Paradiso, as if armed men weren't approaching their home. The girl looked up as Elena entered, her expression serene but alert, the composure of someone who had learned early to find calm in the center of storms. "Time for the safe room?" Sofia asked matter-of-factly, bookmarking her page with careful precision. "How did you—" "I've lived in this world my entire life, Elena. I know the signs." Sofia closed her book and stood gracefully, her movements deliberate rather than hurried. "But this feels different. Papa isn't facing this alone anymore." As Giuseppe led them to a concealed room behind the library's false wall, activated by pulling a specific sequence of books, Elena marveled at the normalcy with which Sofia accepted these extraordinary precautions. "Signora," Giuseppe said as he activated electronic locks that would keep them secure until the confrontation ended, "whatever happens out there, know that you've already won the most important battle." "What do you mean?" "You've given Marco something worth fighting for beyond mere survival. You've made him remember what it means to protect rather than simply to endure." Giuseppe's weathered face showed rare emotion. I've worked for this family for 30 years. I've never seen him fight for anything the way he fights for what you've built together. Through the safe room's monitoring system, Elena watched her husband face down the men who had threatened his family's future. The screens showed multiple angles of the villa's main courtyard, where Marco stood flanked by his sons, a united front that spoke of family solidarity rather than criminal intimidation. The leader of the Rossini group, the same man who had threatened Elena at the academy, approached with 3 companions, their body language aggressive and demanding. But Elena noticed something had changed since their earlier encounter. Marco's posture radiated quiet confidence rather than defensive caution. "You should have accepted our terms, Bianchi," the Rossini leader called out, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "Now you've forced us to take more direct action." "The only thing you've forced," Marco replied, his voice steady and clear, "is the end of your operations in Florence." Alessandro stepped forward slightly, producing the digital recorder with theatrical precision. "Everything you told me about eliminating my father and taking over our territory is documented evidence. The authorities are already moving against your organization." Elena saw the moment when the Rossini leader realized their position had fundamentally shifted. The confident aggression drained from his face, replaced by the calculation of a man recognizing he had been outmaneuvered. "You think hiding behind legitimate authorities will protect you?" he snarled, but Elena detected desperation beneath the bravado. "I think," Marco said quietly, "that men who threaten teachers and children have already lost any claim to respect or fear." The confrontation that followed was briefer than Elena had expected. Sirens in the distance. Inspector Martelli's response to Giuseppe's earlier call changed the entire dynamic. The Rossini men, faced with documented evidence and approaching law enforcement, chose retreat over escalation. As their vehicles disappeared down the villa's drive, Elena felt her knees go weak with relief. Sophia squeezed her hand tightly, the girl's composure finally showing cracks. "Is it over?" Sophia whispered. "Yes, darling, it's over." When Giuseppe opened the safe room, they emerged to find Marco embracing both his sons, the first time Elena had seen such open affection between the 3 men. Luca was crying openly, the weight of nearly betraying his family finally hitting him fully. "I'm sorry, Papa, I was so afraid. Fear is natural, figlio mio. What matters is that when the moment came, you chose family over fear." Elena approached slowly, giving the men their moment of reconciliation. When Marco looked up and saw her, his face transformed with relief and love so profound it took her breath away. "It's finished," he said simply, opening his arms to include her in the family embrace. "We're safe." The family ring on Elena's finger caught the evening light as she wrapped her arms around her husband and children. Its ancient symbol, the eagle that soared above storms, the olive branches that promised peace, blazed like a promise that some things were worth any risk to defend. That night, as they waited for the legal proceedings to begin that would formally end the Rossini threat, Elena realized that somewhere in the midst of protecting this complicated, loving family, she had become exactly who she was meant to be. 6 months later, Elena stood before the mirror in her dressing room, adjusting the ivory silk gown she had chosen for their church wedding. The civil ceremony that had bound them legally felt like a lifetime ago. This celebration would unite them in the eyes of God and their community as partners who had chosen love over convenience. The morning light, streaming through the villa's windows, seemed softer somehow, as if even the Tuscan sun approved of this day. Elena touched the emerald engagement ring that had started their journey, but today it would be joined by a new wedding band, one they had selected together at a small jeweler in Florence's Oltrarno district. Unlike the family heirloom that had sealed their original arrangement, these matching gold bands represented their conscious decision to build something real together. Rosa bustled around the room, adding final touches to Elena's hair, while offering a stream of commentary that mixed practical observations with gentle emotion. "Never thought I'd see the day when you'd remarry, Cara," Rosa said, securing a delicate pearl comb that had belonged to Marco's grandmother. But this man, he's brought life back into your eyes. You move differently now, speak differently. You've remembered how to be happy. Elena smiled at her reflection, recognizing the truth in Rosa's observation. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the solitary teacher who had set the table for two out of habit just 8 months ago. This Elena stood straighter, laughed more easily, and carried herself with the confidence of someone who belonged to a family that valued her contributions. The months following the confrontation with the Rossini family had brought changes that exceeded even Marco's most optimistic expectations. The threat had ended not with violence, but with systematic legal action that Giuseppe had orchestrated with military precision. Alessandro's recorded evidence, combined with testimony from Luca and several other families who had been similarly threatened, provided prosecutors with enough material to dismantle the Rossini operations entirely. 3 family members were currently serving prison sentences for extortion, conspiracy, and illegal weapons charges, while others had fled Italy to avoid prosecution. More importantly, the successful resolution had established Marco's transformation as genuine and complete. Other families now approached him for advice on legitimizing their operations, recognizing that his model offered security that violence could never provide. The Academy had welcomed Elena back after the crisis, with new respect for her courage under pressure. Several board members had quietly mentioned that they were considering expanding the school's security measures, impressed by how she had handled threats that could have destabilized the entire institution. But perhaps the most significant change was in the family dynamics. Alessandro had enrolled in business school at Bocconi University in Milan, determined to learn legitimate management techniques that could help expand the family's legal enterprises. His professors praised his innovative thinking about corporate social responsibility and ethical business practices. Luca, shaken by how close he had come to betraying everything his father valued, had taken a position with the Bianchi Foundation, one of their charitable organizations focused on youth education in disadvantaged neighborhoods. To everyone's surprise, including his own, he had discovered unexpected satisfaction in using family resources to help rather than intimidate. His work with at-risk teenagers had shown him a different kind of respect than the fear-based deference he had grown up expecting. Elena? Sophia's voice came from the doorway, interrupting her reflections. The girl stood there in a pale blue dress that complemented her natural grace, holding a small wrapped package. "May I come in?" "Of course, darling. You look absolutely beautiful." Sophia had blossomed under Elena's guidance over the past months, gaining acceptance to the University of Bologna for literature studies, with plans to become a teacher herself, following in the footsteps of the woman who had become her mother in every way that mattered. "I have something for you," Sophia said, her voice carrying excitement and nervousness in equal measure. "Papa helped me arrange it, but the idea was mine." Elena accepted the package with curious anticipation. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a leather-bound journal with "Our Family Story" embossed in gold on the cover. "I thought you might want to write down everything that's happened," Sophia explained. "For future generations, so they'll know how we became a real family." Elena felt tears spring to her eyes as she opened the journal to find the first page already inscribed in Sophia's careful handwriting. "For Elena, who taught us that the best families are chosen, not just inherited. Thank you for choosing us." "Oh, Sophia." Elena pulled the girl into her arms, both of them crying and laughing simultaneously. The church ceremony took place at Santo Spirito, the ancient basilica near Elena's former apartment. The choice was deliberate. They wanted to celebrate their new beginning in a place that connected to Elena's past while looking toward their shared future. Sunlight streamed through Renaissance windows as Elena walked down the aisle, this time wearing white without reservation and carrying a bouquet of white roses mixed with olive branches, symbols of peace and new beginnings that Giuseppe had suggested, remembering the family crest. Marco waited at the altar in a charcoal suit that emphasized his distinguished bearing, but his eyes held warmth that had been absent during their first ceremony. The transformation in his appearance was subtle but unmistakable. He looked younger somehow, as if love had lifted weights he had carried for years. Beside him stood Alessandro and Luca as his best men, both young men having found their own paths forward since the crisis. Elena noticed how they flanked their father, not just ceremonially, but protectively, having learned the value of what they had almost lost. The congregation that filled the ancient basilica represented the full scope of their new life together. Colleagues from the academy sat beside business associates who represented the family's legitimate interests. Former students, now young women starting their own careers, shared pews with friends who had watched their unlikely romance develop into genuine partnership. Inspector Martelli sat near the back, his presence a reminder of how far they had come from the dangerous world they had escaped. Giuseppe occupied a place of honor in the front row, his usually serious expression softened by what might have been paternal pride. "Dearly beloved," Father Romano began, his voice carrying across the assembled congregation with the authority of someone who had blessed marriages for 4 decades. "We gather today to witness and celebrate a love that has been tested by adversity and strengthened by commitment." When it came time for vows, Elena spoke words she had written in the villa's library, surrounded by books that had become symbols of the intellectual connection she and Marco shared. "Marco, 8 months ago, you offered me a family when I thought I would live and die alone. But you gave me something more precious, the courage to risk my heart again, to believe that love can grow from respect and shared purpose. You showed me that the best partnerships are built not on passion alone, but on trust, mutual support, and the determination to protect what we build together." Elena paused, looking out at the faces of the people who had become her extended family. "I promise to stand beside you in building the legacy we want to leave our children, to be your partner in all things, and to choose love over fear every day of our lives. I promise to honor the memory of what we've lost while embracing the hope of what we're creating." Marco's vows spoke of unexpected grace, of finding in Elena not just the respectability he had sought, but the completion he had never thought to seek. "Elena, you entered my life at a moment when I believed the best of it was behind me. You showed me that transformation is possible at any age, that families can be rebuilt stronger than before, and that love is not diminished by having loved before, but enriched by it." His voice carried clearly through the basilica as he continued. "I promise to protect not just your safety, but your dreams, to support not just your place in our family, but your individual purpose, and to love you not just as my wife, but as the remarkable woman who chose to take a chance on an uncertain future with a complicated man." The celebration that followed took place in the villa's gardens, transformed for the occasion with thousands of white flowers and soft lighting that made the ancient olive trees seem to glow with inner fire. A string quartet played softly as guests moved through the terraced gardens, the music blending with conversation and laughter to create an atmosphere of perfect contentment. Elena moved through the crowd of well-wishers, no longer the nervous outsider, but the confident center of a family that had chosen to define itself by love rather than fear. She paused to speak with each guest, but her attention was constantly drawn back to Marco and the children, her family, won through courage rather than birth. As evening approached, Elena found herself on the terrace overlooking Florence, watching the sun set over the city where her new life had begun. The Duomo's dome caught the golden light, and the Arno reflected the sky like a ribbon of fire winding through the ancient streets. Marco joined her, slipping his arms around her waist from behind with the easy intimacy they had developed over months of shared challenges and quiet moments. "Regrets?" he asked softly, his breath warm against her ear. "Only that we waited so long to do this properly," Elena replied, leaning back against his chest and feeling the solid reassurance of his presence. "Though I suppose we needed time to discover that what we built together was real. And now?" Elena turned in his arms, studying the face that had become dear to her through shared challenges and quiet moments alike. Now I understand what Rosa meant about different kinds of love. What we have isn't the desperate passion of youth, it's something steadier and stronger. It's partnership and respect that grew into devotion. She touched his face gently, marveling at how familiar these features had become. We built this love deliberately, Marco. We chose it every day, protected it when it was threatened, and nurtured it until it became something neither of us expected. Their quiet moment was interrupted by Sophia approaching with purpose, still carrying the same mysterious energy she had brought to the dressing room that morning. "Elena, I have one more surprise for you." The girl's voice carried excitement barely contained. "Papa and I have been working on this for weeks." Elena opened the envelope. Sophia handed her to find legal documents that made her breath catch. Adoption papers, making her officially Sophia's mother, signed and sealed by the appropriate authorities. "Papa arranged it as a wedding gift," Sophia explained, tears shining in her eyes. "But I asked him to. I want everyone to know that you're not just Papa's wife, you're my mother, really and truly." Elena pulled the girl into her arms, both of them crying and laughing simultaneously. "Nothing would make me happier, my darling daughter. Nothing in the world. Does this mean I can call you Mama now?" Sophia whispered against Elena's shoulder. "If you want to, I would be honored." As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Elena found quiet moments with each person who had become important in her new life. Rosa, wiping tears as she prepared to return to her own apartment, promised to be available whenever Elena needed her, not as employer and housekeeper now, but as family. Giuseppe, uncharacteristically emotional after several glasses of champagne, told Elena that she had saved the Bianchi family in ways that went far beyond their recent crisis. "You gave them something to be worthy of," he said simply. Even Inspector Martelli approached before leaving, his official demeanor softened by genuine warmth. "Signora Bianchi, what your family accomplished, the transformation from criminal enterprise to legitimate business, it's unprecedented in my experience. You should be proud." Later that night, as Elena and Marco prepared for bed in rooms they would now share as true husband and wife, Elena thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. She had gained far more than the family she had always wanted. She had discovered strength she hadn't known she possessed, courage that had surprised even her, and love that grew stronger rather than weaker when tested. The emerald ring sat in its place of honor on her dresser, but the simple gold band on her finger carried greater weight. It represented choice made freely, love given willingly, and the promise of a future built on the solid foundation of partnership and mutual devotion. As they lay together in the darkness, Marco's arms around her and the sounds of their peaceful home surrounding them, Elena reflected on how completely her life had changed. The woman who had once eaten solitary dinners while reading dead poets now fell asleep, planning family vacations and dreaming about grandchildren she might someday help raise. "Marco?" she whispered into the comfortable darkness. "Thank you for being brave enough to propose to a stranger." His laugh rumbled through his chest, where her head rested. "Thank you for being brave enough to say yes." The next morning, Elena woke to the sound of Sophia practicing piano in the music room and the aroma of coffee drifting up from the kitchen. Marco was already up, probably meeting with Giuseppe about some business matter or another, but he had left a single white rose on her pillow with a note, "For my wife, who chose love over fear. Buongiorno, amore mio." As Elena dressed for what would be their first full day as a truly married couple, she caught sight of herself in the mirror and smiled. Some nights, Elena still set the table for two, but now someone was always coming home. In fact, now there were 4 place settings at their family table, and Elena was considering whether they might need to add a 5th for Rosa, who had been joining them for Sunday dinners with increasing frequency. The empty apartment across the river, the solitary meals, the conversations with Antonio's memory, all of that belonged to a woman Elena barely remembered. This Elena, the one adjusting her wedding ring and planning breakfast for her family, was someone who had learned that the heart's capacity for love was infinite, that families could be built as well as born, and that sometimes the greatest adventures began with the simple courage to say yes to an impossible proposal from a complicated stranger who turned out to be exactly what she had been waiting for all along.